Hey there, Jim Johnson for Accent Help here, and I'm responding to a question that somebody had for me. They were asking me what the difference is between the lowercase e symbol and the epsilon symbol. So the lowercase e symbol versus the epsilon looks like a backwards 3. So the difference between them. Well, if we look at the vowel chart, which the setup of the vowel chart is front of the mouth, back of the mouth, top of the mouth, bottom of the mouth. And this is a pretty close representation to where the vowels are in relation to each other. So these two are both at the front, and they are not at the extremes of the top and the bottom. Instead, they are what's called close mid and near and open mid. So they're towards the middle, but they do show them on the chart separated. And I do think that they have some separation. I think most of the times the way that they occur is a little bit closer to each other, but there you go. So, what are the differences? Well, the lowercase e one is a higher vowel, so it happens a little bit higher in the mouth, whereas the epsilon's a little bit lower. So, eh, eh. Now, the way that they tend to be used in phonetic transcriptions, if you're looking at broad transcription, sometimes they are the same, depending on who's doing the transcriptions. And in fact, one of the issues is that if you look at a lot of pronunciation dictionaries, they will sort of default most of the time to the lowercase e. Now, the way that they're sometimes used in broad transcription is just that the lowercase e all by itself means a, the diphthong a. That's broad transcription. When you get it in narrow transcription, which I think is important, you can realize that there are some accents where people don't say a, but instead just say a, where it doesn't get the movement of the diphthong. So I think it is important to not let this lowercase e all by itself represent a. You lose the ability to differentiate certain sounds. So I want to get rid of that. However, the way that oftentimes I see it used is as a part of the diphthong of a. And I think that is the case for many occurrences of the way that many different people will say the face sound, face, a. Now, the second half of the diphthong oftentimes has a little sort of curve above it, meaning extra short. So it's the extra short symbol. If you do iambic pentameter sort of stuff, sometimes it's used for the unstressed syllable in iambic pentameter, or as a diacritic, actually a suprasegmental, which is kind of like a diacritic. I feel like it should be under diacritics instead of suprasegmentals, but this may be something that I'm too ignorant about to not realize why. So the extra short element, that means the second half of diphthongs in general tend to be shorter, right? So this is how that one is traditionally used, whereas the epsilon is usually used, even when it's poorly written like mine just was, it tends to be used to just explain the sound all by itself. Now, I think that another way that it commonly is used is when you put basically the R after it. I like to think of this less as a diphthong and more of a vowel plus R. So this would be an epsilon followed by a schwa, which is a turned lowercase e, with the diacritic on it to mean rhoticity. And this would be something like air, air. So I think that most Americans, if I'm going to generalize, will say air or as square, and will say dress, dress. Now I think when you go to RP, for example, and other British speakers, you will get some variations, right? I think that sometimes that is more likely something like dress, dress, and air, where I think that the first half of the vowel plus R, only the R gets dropped, would be that lowercase e, air, air, in many speakers, like an RP speaker. And I think that is the case for some other accents as well. Now, these are not the only ways to use them. Like many Irish accents the diphthong is more like this, a. That is also true. It's true of a number of different accents that you can get different diphthongs. These are the ones that are most commonly utilized, the way that they're commonly utilized in dictionaries, except that some of the dictionaries don't use epsilon, but just use the lowercase e to indicate the sound in general. So some pronouncing dictionaries, Cambridge Pronouncing Dictionary, for example, just doesn't even use the epsilon. They just repeatedly use the lowercase e. And something I had heard, but I was digging into that for prepping this a little bit, is one of the things that I remember hearing in the past is, oh, well, the reason that it's that way in so many pronouncing dictionaries is because at one point only the lowercase e existed in the phonetic alphabet, and then the epsilon was added later. But when I was digging into, like looking, I think it was like the 1910 International Phonetic Alphabet, had the epsilon and the lowercase e in it. So that doesn't seem to be the case. So why they tend to do that, I don't know. And there may be somebody who in the comments has some clarification on that. Is there a difference? Yeah, it happens. I think it's useful to think of there being a difference. I think it's a useful tool to realize, for example, that many foreign language speakers who learn English, they don't say dre-s. Many of them don't have that sound. They have something more like all by itself, the lowercase e. So they don't say dress, they say something more like dress, es. So it's almost like drace, but minus the second half, dress. I think that occurs in many ESL, EFL, English as a second language, English as a foreign language accents. So that I think is sufficient for where I tend to see the differences between those two symbols, how they tend to be used, but also how I think they can be useful. There you go. If you want to dive a little bit more into phonetics, then you could check out the generic and materials. But otherwise, in general, if you're curious about accents, you can check out accenthelp.com.